Okay, I want to welcome everyone here today. Thank you for being at this press conference. I'm actually here today wearing two hats in two particular roles, one as a father of two teenagers and the other as the chief prosecutor for the state of South Carolina. I'm Attorney General Alan Wilson, and I am pleased to be joined here today by Senator Brad Hutto and Representative Raye Felder, who have been leaders on some important legislation that we have been championing in the Attorney General's office, and I want to thank both of them for their leadership, and you're going to hear from them momentarily. But first, let's talk about why we are here today. I look at technology, and I see it growing at an exponentially fast rate. You look at things like AI, artificial intelligence. AI is today, in 2024, what the Internet was in 1994. It is a new and innovative technology, but it is also incredibly disruptive. We don't yet know how AI and other advanced technologies and software are going to change how we prosecute child exploitation laws, but we know that it is evolving rapidly. Over the past few decades, since the 90s, the law has struggled to keep up with technology. As technology has evolved, criminals have evolved in the way that they exploit children. That is what today is about. It is catching the law up to the advancements in technology so that we can get ahead of this and go after those who intend to hurt and exploit our children. Now, I want to put this in perspective. Our ICAC division, our Internet Crimes Against Children division, and some of them are standing behind me today, they are on the front lines. And every year they receive cyber tips from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, known as NCMEC. And they flag what we call CSAM files, or CSAM pictures. CSAM stands for child sexual abuse material. It used to call it child porn, but it's now called child sex abuse material. They get these reports or these tips from people who call into this line. Just to give you an idea of how it has grown in South Carolina, in 2010, our office received 494 cyber tips on potential child porn or CSAM material. In 2020 and 2021, that number was at 4,443 tips. From 2021's year to 2023, that number nearly doubled from 4,400 to 8,300 cyber tips. That is nearly a 1,600% in the number of child sex abuse material reports coming in to our office in literally a year. It has nearly doubled. Now, some people might say, is child pornography and child exploitation proliferating at that amount, or are we just seeing it more? I would offer to you that it is both. Criminals are having easier access to technology, easier access to the internet. It's the Internet of Things. It's the era that we live in, and they are more easily able to exploit kids. However, as we evolve in our ability to investigate and prosecute them, we're seeing more of it, we're catching more of it, and so you're going to see that trajectory of child exploitation continue to go up. But you're going to see it go up because of the efforts of law enforcement community and also because of the efforts of our legislative counterparts who are giving us the tools that we need to effectively go after child predators who use the internet and AI and other softwares to exploit children. Now, in September of this past year, I led a bipartisan letter of 54 attorneys general. Literally every attorney general in the country, bipartisan, Republican, Democrat, everyone signed on to a letter that we sent to the leadership of Congress saying that we would like Congress to take a look at the federal laws as it relates to how we protect and prosecute child sex abuse type cases and exploitation cases at the federal law. I then met with the leadership of the House and Senate, and I gave them a copy of that letter that we sent to Congress and saying, here's a template of what we would like you to do. And what that letter basically said is that what I've already told you, the technology is evolving so fast, the law needs to keep up with it. And we identified several anecdotal scenarios where we're seeing children be abused. For instance, you're seeing people take photos, or they're taking pictures of children who are currently being abused and then using software or AI and reinventing that abuse and putting that child in another sexual exploitive photo or video and re-abusing the same child. We're also seeing pictures of children who are not being abused. It could be a Facebook video or a picture or a TikTok video or an Instagram picture of a child at a Christmas event with their family or at a church picnic. And that picture is lifted up and used with advanced software or AI to basically show a child who has never been abused in a sexually exploitive manner. And then we're also seeing children who are created out of whole cloth. They do not exist. They're fake children. But these people out there are trying to find loopholes where they can evade prosecution and incarceration, and they make the argument, this child doesn't exist. You can't exploit a fictitious child. But what they're doing is they're feeding the market for child sex abuse and child sex exploitation. And so we have asked the legislature, and the legislature has answered our call. And you're going to hear from some of these legislators and some of the folks they've been working with in the Joint Citizens and Legislative Committee on Children. And I want to thank this committee, a committee of legislators and citizens coming together to identify areas where we can work together to cover these gaps. Now, I could go into the specific details of each of these bills. I'm going to keep it at 30,000 feet and let Senator Hutto and Representative Felder go into a little bit more detail. But these bills basically go into they cover the areas that I just talked about. One bill deals with, it's called MPIC, M-P-I-C, Morphed Pornography of Identifiable Children. And the other one deals with visual exploitation or obscene visual representations of children. It could be AI, it could be something else. But these bills cover those areas that I just talked about, where you're morphing a child, an identifiable child, into a sexualized photo or video. The other one could be situations in which you are photoshopping. It could even be crude. You're taking a visual representation of a child engaged in a sex act or a sexual exploitive manner, and you're criminalizing it. You're giving us the tools to go after those people. We had a situation in which a guy, I think he might have been using Photoshop, and it was rather crude, but took a picture of his daughter, placed it on an adult female's body, and a picture of himself, and placed it on another adult body, engaging in an activity. Now, this individual was prosecuted for other child exploitive laws because he had tons and tons of these pictures and videos on his computer, but this is one area that would have fallen through the gaps. And so it allows us to go after those people who are using technology to try to get in front of the law or get around the law to continue feeding the market for exploiting children. And so today we are wanting to let South Carolina know, working together in a bipartisan fashion, we're here to say enough. We're going to come after you. If you're going to try to exploit children, we're coming for you. And we want to thank, and I personally want to thank Senator Hutto and Representative Felder, and we have Senator Mike Rickenbach, who was also here, who was on this committee. We have other legislative leaders who couldn't be here, but I want to thank you legislators for what you've done to give us these tools. And standing behind them, always in the shadows, always out of sight, is members of our Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, who are on the front lines of this war against child predators. So at this time, I would invite Senator Hutto to come up here to make a few brief remarks, and then he'll be followed by Representative Felder.
Good morning. I'm Brad Hutto, Senator from Orangeburg, Minority Leader of the South Carolina Senate, and this year the Chairman of the what we call the Children's Committee. Representative Felder was the past Chairman last year, and during that year we heard testimony from the Attorney General's office. And let me stop and say, we want to thank General Wilson. He's demonstrated terrific leadership in this area, and his office has identified to us a problem, and it's a problem where technology meets crime. We have laws on the book right now that allow the Attorney General's office and the other prosecutors around this state to prosecute people who are actually abusing real live children, identifiable children. But now we've got the criminals creating children. They are using artificial intelligence and other technologies to create the image of a child that doesn't exist. And they're putting that child that doesn't exist in these terribly pornographic poses, and they're feeding the marketplace of people who would exploit real children by using fake children. And so you've heard about deep fakes and that kind of thing. That's exactly what this is. And what the Attorney General's office has basically come to us and said is, we don't really have a law that says that that's illegal. if it's a real child and we know what that child looks like, we have laws to prosecute them. But if these criminals are creating fake children to create terrible images, to then go out and create the opportunity for people to view this with period interest and you know, that will lead them to exploit real children, it's a problem. So what we wanted to do was make sure that the Attorney General's office, his Representative Calhoun, who's also on our committee, come on up, Representative Beth Bernstein, who couldn't be with us this morning, and also Senator Katrina Shealy, who couldn't be with us this morning. But we're the legislative members of the committee, and they came to us at our Children's Committee meeting, I believe it was in December, identified the problem. We've been working with the Attorney General's office on language to try and tighten it up, because as you might imagine, if you saw, and please don't go out and look for it, it's there, but if you saw this imagery, it's horrible, but it's not real. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't be against the law, because it feeds a marketplace that we do not want to feed. So that's what this bill does. On this bill, there's a companion bill that deals with another topic, and I'm going to turn it over to Representative Felder to talk about that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm Raye Felder. I'm the House Representative for House District 26. And I believe the two attorneys have probably covered just about everything I could possibly add to this. The Joint Citizens and Legislative Committee on Children, we have been looking at morphed pornography of identifiable children. And as you heard them, that's MPIC. It is on the rise in our state. This is when a child's picture is taken from another photo, TikTok, internet, Facebook, and morphed into an image as to appear as if the child is actually engaged in a sexual activity. It can be very difficult to distinguish the real from the fictitious image because face swapping has become easy. There are a lot of apps, there's a lot of technology out there. With a lot of appreciation and gratitude to the Attorney General's office and of course his great team, we now have both bodies. There's a bill in the House and a bill in the Senate that would both amend our state's exploitation of a minor statute to include morphed photography of identifiable minors. It would also require the offender to be on the sex offender registry. So these bills would allow our law enforcement to investigate and prosecute these crimes against our children. I would like to say a special thank you to the brave family that shared the experience with the committee. This family, their children, their pictures were morphed onto pornographic images. When the family learned that that was not a crime that could be prosecuted, they also learned that there were no services available for the victims because it was not a crime. So the Children's Committee, along with the Attorney General's office, got together and worked out the legislation. And I'd have to give a special thank you to Shealy Rybold and the staff of the Joint Citizens and Legislative Committee on Children. They did a yeoman's job researching and gathering information and looking at what other states were doing. So I think we have put children first. I think both of these legislations put children first in our state. Our children are our future, and I'm thankful that we have the dedicated public servants to put the time and the energy into developing these legislation. We are hopeful for quick passage of these bills so that children and families who are victims to this heinous crime will have the opportunity for justice and for victims advocacy. With that, I'll turn it back over to the Attorney General. Thank you all.
Thank you, Representative Felder. And again, I want to thank Representative Calhoun, who ran over here from another meeting, my hometown House member, my personal representative, and thank you for joining our team up here. And I had intended for the Children's Committee members and staff to be up here because they really are the ones behind the scenes really working hard with our office. And of course, again, I want to thank the ICAC team. I'm up here doing all the talking, but the work is getting done in places that the general public and the media doesn't see. And I want to thank all of those people at the staff level who really make it happen. I want to close by saying enough is enough. There are people out there who are going to always look for ways to use technology to evade accountability for their heinous acts of exploiting children, whether it's using anime portrayals of child abuse or drawings or AI or graphical representations. Whatever you're doing to try to circumvent or get away from the long arm of the law, it's going to end soon. And this could not happen but for all of us coming together to address this and to evolve our laws to keep up with the technological innovations that we're seeing at an ever-increasing pace here in South Carolina. So I want to thank the media, too, for your role, for telling the stories and letting folks out there know what's going on and what we're doing to combat it. So at this time, I think members of the committee, the legislators up here are happy to take any questions, myself included. The question is, there were over 8,000 tips last year, and that was just general tips on, child exploitive laws. I don't think we have a breakdown of which of those would have fallen through the cracks. What I was trying to illustrate with that number was two things. There is an increasing amount of child or CSAM material, child sex abuse material, and it's growing. Our ability to catch it and see it is growing, and the fact that it exists and it's out there, and people who are inclined to do this are going to do it at an exponentially greater amount of time. They're going to invest a lot more time in doing it. So we want the public to know that this is a real problem, it exists, and it is growing. As technology grows, the crime is growing, but our resources are also growing, thanks to the folks standing up here with me today. And again, thank you for giving us the laws and the funding. Kyle Sin is head of our ICAC task force, and he's standing up here, and he and I were talking. I didn't ask for it this year, but he said, General, we could have 40 ICAC investigators, 40 new positions funded, and it probably still wouldn't be enough to keep up. I mean, there is a backlog in prosecutions because we're indicting so fast, but our ability to keep up is difficult because there's so much of this going on out there. So I can't quantify how much of those 8,000 plus picks would this apply to. But what I can tell you is there's anecdotal observations by those in the law enforcement and prosecution communities, and members of this committee can attest to this. There's a lot of this type of material that would not be covered by laws. I can't attribute a percentage to it, but we're seeing it, and it is out there, and so we're trying to get in front of it. Yes, ma'am. Do y'all have any? I'm told we don't have that data, that comparison between us and North Carolina and Georgia. I'm sure we could probably reach out to our counterparts over there and see if we could put that information together for you. That's a good question. I just don't have the answer to it here. I'm gonna keep going. You, then back to you. So go ahead. Well, and I know that you've got grandchildren. I mean, all of us have kids or grandkids in our lives. And when I started this press conference, the first thing I said was, I'm here wearing two hats. And the first thing I said is, I'm a dad. I've got a 15 and a 14-year-old at home. And I know people have younger children. And it scares me to death as a parent. And I know people here who have children in their lives, it scares them. And what's sad is most parents and grandparents and people who are the guardians of children don't think about this. And the one thing that we always hear when there's a real child being sexually abused or a child who's being exploited, we always hear, or not always, but usually we'll hear, I never thought this would happen to me. And I had in my notes, and I didn't say it in my opening remarks, but I do want to say it now. They can give us all the funding we ask for, and they do. They can pass all the laws that we ask them to pass to give us the resources and the ability to go after this, and they do. But the last line of defense for young children are the guardians and the parents. It's the parents right there. It is so easy to hand your child a cell phone and say, go play in the corner, I'm cooking dinner, or we're driving down the road, and that child has got the World Wide Web in their pocket. And it is so easy to not observe or watch or monitor what your children are doing. You know, the parents are the last line of defense. For older kids, teenagers, you know, they are the last line of defense with the parents looking over them. Don't inspect what you expect, is what I tell parents. But the last line of defense is either the child who is on that device or the parent who has given that child a device. And so there's not enough money, not enough laws we can pass that can save people, you know, when they're going out there. You have to exercise responsibility. I've said this with the internet. It's like giving a 3-year-old a chainsaw, right? The internet in the hands of a responsible person, you know, the internet is a valuable tool and a resource to use. The internet in the hands of someone who doesn't understand or respect its power or how dangerous it can be, it's a deadly weapon, both to the user and to anyone around them. And so we have to educate parents, we have to educate young people. Obviously, you know, given, you know, a 6, 7, 8-year-old probably can't protect themselves, but we need to educate our 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds. So as a parent, I know other people up here who are parents, grandparents, they probably feel the same way. I don't want to speak for them, but I imagine they're nodding their heads behind me right now that yes, parents need to be aware of what is out there. Yes. The question again is, are people using these with real children? Oh, absolutely. I gave an anecdotal example. It was crude, but you know, a man took you've seen how people put a square photo, you know, it doesn't even look, you can tell it's photoshopped. You know, we've seen people do that. We've seen people do anime. We've seen people, you know, of course AI is so advanced now, it's almost indistinguishable, but we have seen people take real children and morph them or represent them in a sexualized manner. And we see that happening with real children. What we want to stop is we want to cut off feeding the market. Just because the child isn't real doesn't mean it's not or let me say it this way. Taking a picture of a child at a church picnic and then placing that child's effigy through AI software or some other type of software onto a sexualized representation, people can justify in their head, I'm not offending, I'm not exploiting that child. Well, yes, you are exploiting that child, even though that child was never actually touched. Creating a child out of thin air, saying, I'm not hurting anybody. Well, you're feeding the market and trying to grow the market for people who are exploiting real children elsewhere. And that's what we want to cut off. People have a First Amendment right to do whatever they want, but they don't have a First Amendment right to exploit children or increase the market for exploitation of children. And that's what we're trying to attack right now. Well, obviously, law enforcement is where I always send people, but there's a hotline. Kyle, is there a hotline for?
Yes, the cyber tip hotline.
The cyber tip hotline is what I was. If you Google the NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or cyber tip hotline, or if you just don't feel like writing that down, just call the Attorney General's office and tell someone you want to be able to report it. Our people in our office will get you to the reports. Obviously, if there's an imminent threat, obviously always go to law enforcement first. But if you want to report something that you suspect, our office is happy to take that call and get you to the right authorities. I think you raised your hand.
Well, on the Senate side, and I'm sure the House is probably the same, we're going to get it. They've been assigned to committees. We'll get subcommittee hearings within the next few weeks. We're aware of the deadlines we have to meet to cross over, but these are important tools for law enforcement. I don't think we'll have any problem in making the deadline. Sure. Well, manufacture, distribution, possession, all of the above. All right. If we find out that you're engaged in it in any manner, what we're trying to do is make that a crime. Because right now, it is a crime if the child is real. These are two separate instances in when the child is not real. Might be the real face of a child on somebody else's body, or it's just the whole thing is totally made up. And that's where the gap has been. And, you know, you asked earlier how many there are. Well, one's too many. And that's what we're trying to say, is that we want it to stop altogether because, as the general said, it feeds the marketplace.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I apologize.
If you're asking, does it get to the technology companies, the people that create the technology? No, it's the people that misuse the technology, because the technology actually may have some very useful legal, things that you can do with it. We're not trying to thwart innovation, and AI is, look, whether you like it or not, and whether you like the fact that kids have phones or not, it's the world we live in, right? And AI is here and it's coming, but it doesn't mean that it can be misused by criminals. And we're trying to stay ahead of them, but technology has made it such that words on paper don't keep up. And that's what we're trying to do, is make sure that they do.
Yeah, we're not, and to follow on with what the senator said, we're not trying to stop innovative technologies from proliferating and being used. AI is like a hammer or a gun or a knife. You know, it has a purpose. An appropriate person in the hands of a person who's using it correctly, it's a great resource or a tool. But someone can use a knife, a gun, or a chainsaw in an evil manner. And so we're going after the conduct, not the technology. And so that's what I want to make sure we distinguish. We don't want to demonize AI like we don't want to demonize the internet. We want to demonize the conduct and what people are using it for. Last question. Yes, sir. I think I'm understanding your question. It's just hard to hear from back there. So you're saying how damaging is for a young child, 6 or 7? I can imagine for young children who are aware, and by the way, any minor, whether there's, and I know this isn't directly on point, but you've heard of sextortion. I mean, obviously, recent bill you referenced. You've seen situations in which kids have been cyberbullied, where a girl sends a picture to her boyfriend, and then he goes around the school sharing it, and all of a sudden they are ostracized. There have been kids around the country who have actually committed suicide, right, on those types of conduct. That's not directly what these bills address, but the point is, kids are very vulnerable in society. And when we were growing up, if you got into a fight on the playground, it stayed on the playground. But now technology, it follows you everywhere, even into your bedroom. And so, every child is going to be different in how they respond to it. Every family is going to be different. But I can imagine it's going to be incredibly traumatic for a child to see a representation of themselves being abused. And then I can only imagine how embarrassing and traumatic it would be for other people to see it, and that child have to walk into a classroom, even though they never engaged in that activity. I mean, it can really destroy a life. And it has destroyed lives. Okay, y'all are asking great questions, but we got to cut the press conference. But if there's someone behind me that wants to make a comment, you feel free to go to the cameras. But I want to thank the media for being here today. This concludes this press conference. Have a great day, everyone.